So we're gonna focus a lot on the family part of it and try to give you guys some ideas and some thoughts so that when you're looking into earlier intervention and you kind of know what you want and what you want to get out of the professionals that you connect with. But just to quickly look back at the professional aspect of it, early intervention really should involve whatever services and providers that are needed to meet the needs of your child. That could be the pediatrician working with other specialists. It could be a nurse, a physical therapist, occupational therapist, speech therapist, special instruction, teacher of the visually impaired, which is what Nicole is. Teachers of the deaf and hard of hearing are another one you might hear of, social workers and psychologists. And most programs have access to all of these providers, though they may use them in different ways. But it's good to know because you may come across a situation where you really need a specialist in a certain area, and you should advocate for that. Okay, so the most important thing here that we're going to say all day long is you don't need to wait to be connected to somebody to start doing things with your child that are going to benefit them in learning new skills. Everything you do, intentional or not, is going to provide learning. You get the incidental learning from those experiences that you provide your child. So don't be afraid, to try things, to come up with ideas, and then when you get hooked up, you can use that professional knowledge to keep going from there. Okay, and this is kind of just does the same thing. I took this off of the Rare Chromo website because I just loved how it said, basically, we can think about those features, but there's also personalities and other genes. So you never really know where your child is going to be exactly. You have to keep following them and keep guiding them, and they're going to lead you in their own direction, just like any child. Okay, so in looking more specifically at motor and mobility, there are just some basic premise of any child learning and gaining motor skills. And so as a physical therapist and my background, what we think about is you move from the cyclical automatic kind of movements, those neurological movements in the beginning, to gaining control over those movements, and then having purposeful movements. So that's kind of the trajectory that we go on. Then we're looking at gross motor and fine motor skills. So gross motor skills are those large body movements we think of: rolling, crawling, sitting, walking, throwing, then they get harder, throwing a ball, hopping, whatnot. And fine motor skills involve the smaller muscles of the body and the more refined movements, such as grasping and releasing with control, manipulating objects, orienting them to put them exactly where you want them, or using tools, things like pens and pencils to scribble and color, or using a tool to feed yourself, stuff like that. And as far as therapy goes, in general, we think about a physical therapist typically guides the gross motor skills, and an occupational therapist may work more specifically on the fine motor skills, and especially things like feeding. But depending on where you are, especially with young children, we overlap quite a bit. So the physical and occupational therapists typically work together, and we'll be doing a lot of the same things. Because children, young children, they don't just need to crawl or move to get to something. They need to want to do something with it when they get there. They need to be able to play. So I just kind of looked through the literature that was available to give me an idea of the timelines, because with syndromes, they're typically, we'll find, are on their own timelines or ranges. And so that helps us, it helps us to know that and put it in the back of our mind. I don't let that slow us down. I don't let that limit me at all. but it gives me an idea of where I may need to focus. So if you do start working with a therapist and they don't know anything about 1P36, you want to give them as much education as you can, because you probably know more than them starting out. Keep saying, oh, I'm nervous. So again, we'll talk about the motor thread in development, and we're going to show you some of that in action as we go along. But to me, I have learned over the years more and more about how motor spurs all of development, particularly cognitive development and social interaction, language, or communication. In the sensory motor stage, which is the very young children, it's all about learning what is out there, touching it, feeling it, and figuring out an action on an object and the reaction of your action. So that's a cognitive process, but if you are not able to access those toys, to hold them, because every time you reach for them, you can't grasp and they move away, you're not getting those opportunities. So it's our mission to find ways of helping children that have difficulties, either with sitting, to give them support so that they can sit and access an object. They have trouble with grasping, to come up with ways for them to be able to still access that object, whether it's using Velcro to keep it on their hands so they can still explore it, or using sort of containerization to keep the objects close so they can get to them. That's just one example. And every different area also has its stages and moves from the lower levels to the higher levels. And that can be supported through those motor movements and ability to access. As far as communication, they've found a lot of the research now is looking very closely at why does movement increase communication. So when I think of communication, it's not necessarily using words to speak, but making social bids, wanting to interact with other people, wanting to show them an object and learn about it. So a child that brings you an object is saying, look what I have, I want to learn about it. And then as you interact with them, they're getting that communication and they're wanting to communicate back and forth with you. So that's a lot of what they're finding in some of that research, which is pretty cool. And then another aspect, motor-wise, is just that in order to be able to produce sounds or even access a communication device, you need to have the motor ability to do that. So your posture impacts your spine alignment, it impacts your rib cage, your breathing control, which you need all of those things coordinated in order to produce sound. Or if you're using a communication device, you need to be able to access exactly what picture or grasp and exchange, depending on what communication you're using. Okay. So what's most important about children is that they learn by all of their senses. In fact, we all do. These are sort of lessons from babies that are important for everyone, but particularly thinking about helping a child to grow and learn and become an older child and then an adult. You want to be multimodal, and all that means is think about all the senses. When you're learning about something, you learn from the way something smells, the way it feels, the way it looks. So you want to give your children as many of those different senses involved as you're presenting new experiences, new objects with them. Be incremental. So that kind of reminds us that we learn things little by little and then we put them together. And for some kids, you might even need to break it down a little bit more and then practice part of a skill, part of a skill, part of a skill, then add the rest of the skill as you go along. And that's going to be really important as families, because a therapist that you may work with would be able to help you break down the skill, and then you would be practicing that with your child every day, because families really, you become therapists. You become teachers. And we all do with all of our children, but we need to know how to be these teachers and how to provide this information. The third is to be physical. So think about, that goes along with the mobility and accessing and reaching and touching. You need to be physical. You have to access your world in a physical way. Be social. We learn from the people that we love. We want to interact with others, and so do our kids. And then communication. And communication, again, it can be in so many different ways, but the important part is to help your child to give you a way to communicate when they're upset, when they're angry, when they are happy, when they want to do something. And so obviously, they talked about behavior earlier. That also plays into a lot of that. But we find if we can concentrate on communication, that also typically helps with behavior, because if a child knows that they're being understood and they're communicating something, then you're able to validate that and move on. Okay, so this goes into a little bit more of the research, and I promise you we're gonna talk and we're gonna see more things. But I'm a little bit of a research geek because it focuses me on what I need to think about when I'm starting to work with a child. Exploratory actions, and this is a lot of what I've been saying the whole time. You're using vision, auditory, touch, sensory needs, and from what I understand, your kids also have big sensory needs. Some need deep pressure, some need spinning, and that can differ from child to child. So you would need to figure out what kind of sensory supports and then be able to meet those. Stability and mobility, that's being able to help them be in a stable position to move their arms and legs to access things, and providing mobility. So if a child is not walking, how else can we help them to get around? Are we carrying them? Are we putting them in a stroller? Can we give them a mobility device to help them to move? Those are all things to consider. And then the last, again, is that object interaction, ability to manipulate it, to use those objects as a means for that social interaction, for learning and then developing communication. Okay, so Nicole and I became very interested in the Go Baby Go project that came out of the University of Delaware, because as a physical therapist and a teacher, we had a lot of kids who were delayed in their mobility. So we're trying to come up with ways for them to be able to move around more independently. A lot of times in therapy, we're working so hard on crawling or walking, but it's so effortful and it's hard for the child to get around the environment. It's a lot of work for the caregiver to assist them. So what are more ways that a child can be independent in moving around while they're still working on those other skills? And through their research, what they started to do was to adapt some of the off-the-market cars, and so that children could access them and start to learn, oh, I can move within my environment by myself. And I'm gonna let Nicole talk a little bit more about the Go Baby Go project, and we'll kind of go back and forth.
Thank you. So as you can see here with the pink car, what happens is, say you have this is touch screen. So that was made, for example, for a child who was having a hard time holding her head up. So we gave her a reason to hold her head up. If she wanted to go, she had to put her head back, touch the switch, and go. And the day that we put these cars together, there were many, many smiles and many tears, because children had a reason to hold their heads up and to look around and be happy that they were moving themselves. Okay, so power mobility. This is Skylar. She's adorable. We were actually at Kennedy Krieger working with her and her physical therapist and her occupational therapist and her speech therapist. So that just gives you an idea with power mobility how many people that we can touch upon, and we can say that this can be included in everything that you're doing. So Dr. Logan and other professors, they modified ride-on car for standing preschooler play in gymnasium and a playground, and with power mobility versus crutches, less solitary play and more peer, less adult interaction. Yeah, you talk about it.
I can talk about this. So in my doctoral work, I looked a lot more at the research of power mobility. And these are just examples. There's really a big explosion in that area right now as far as what are the benefits and can you show that it's impacting things across the development in multiple domains. And they really are showing a lot of those things. These are just different examples that show they're using power mobility in the home setting, in the hospital setting, and in the school setting very effectively, and they're showing that it does increase a child's internal motivation to move. So not only, I often will introduce a car even if a child is walking, even if they've just started to walk, but walking is still very effortful. I may introduce a car because then they can move around the environment very easily. And what they've found in research is that by doing that, you're giving that child some sort of understanding that they're trying to figure out, but some sort of understanding about the environment and more desire maybe to explore it. So they have found that kids that are doing both at the same time tend to increase their like physical therapy mobility at the same time they're using cars. So we're using this a lot at the same time. Other things that they've been kind of isolating and researching is in a classroom setting, how does the car impact this child's ability to interact with other children? And they've found that kids with special needs in general tend to have more interactions with adults than other children. Because think about their lives. They need a lot of caregiving. They're with adults all the time. They may be more familiar with the communication routine with that adult or adults in general, where other children are, you know, they can be unpredictable and confusing. So what they've found is when you give a child a way to move more easily toward and away also from others, they will make more social bids. So more times will they go over and even sometimes it's just to drive over and look and see what other kids are doing. And also they found that the kids in the classroom interacted with the child more, especially when you can involve all of the kids with whatever device you're using. So that's the other thing to think about with the cars is we try not to make it like, oh no, this is only for Susie because she has a special need. And we say, no, this is a car, we're all gonna use it and we all get involved. And they find that kids typically do a lot better. And we've definitely found that when we're in the homes a lot, so we try to involve the brothers and sisters, or if we're in a daycare, the other kids. It's very important. And I can talk lots more about the research if anybody wants to later, but let's move on to something more fun. So this is a video of Skylar, and then I'll let you talk about it if you want.
Oh, okay. Just to give you a little background, Skylar, she was born extremely premature. She only has vision, maybe this much vision in one eye. So of course people, when I said, let's put her in a car, they looked at me like I was nuts. They're like, you're putting a blind kid in a car. I said, yes, I'm putting a blind kid in a car. Because she needs work on holding her head up. She needs to learn cause and effect. I push a button, that means I go. She needs to learn directions, stop, go, come here. So there were many things that we were working on, but we just needed to change it up a little bit. Uh-oh. It says QuickTime not available. Uh-oh. I don't know where our
AV help.
Where's our AV help?
Uh-oh. All right, well, until they find somebody. Okay.
Until someone comes.
So until they get back, what I'll do is just, after that, I had put some other ways, because sometimes it's hard to access these things. So parents have been very innovative in coming up with ways to help their child move around. And this is one of my absolute favorites. I found it on the internet. I'm gonna try it. So this is a bumbo seat. Probably some of you guys have used that to help sitting. You want to see if I couldn't get the video to work.
Let's throw it on my computer and it should play. Okay. Unless you can't. Yeah, it doesn't want to. But here, I have it. I can give you the flash drive. Okay. And you can do that.
Sorry about that.
All right. It's my work computer, so. Yeah, I can't download the program. So if it's not there, it won't play.
And my work computer died this week, so.
You're without a laptop, I'm without a laptop.
You get a break. There it is. It's probably the first, yeah, that one right there.
That one?
Yep. Okay, we'll try it again. Okay. You should be able to click on it usually and it'll play. Yeah. I did play it at home. There we go. Some of you may have seen some friends driving in the hallway today, too.
I know why. Yeah, the sound is outputting.
Do you want to talk about?
Yeah. Yeah, I did. So like I was saying, so Skylar, she was born at 24 weeks gestation. And basically her mother said to me when I still remember the day that I met them in the hospital, and she said the moment she cried was the moment I looked at the doctor and said, save her. So they have been extremely they are just yeah, the first time. Oh, go ahead and play if you're here. I'll finish the story.
Yeah? Okay. Yes? Yes? Okay.
Okay.
Oh, we're gonna reach the door. Stop. You did it. You went all over. Turn around. More. More card. Yeah. Okay. Yes. Yes. Okay.
I don't think this is right. So when she opened her mouth, that's her yes. So then we turned her around and we went some more. Does anyone want to guess how many times it took Skylar to learn that? One time. It took her one time. And this is a little girl who generally, when she's sitting on the ground in therapy, her head is down, there's lots of drool, it's hard for her to move her arms, it's hard for her to really sit up straight. And what we did was in there, we gave her the option of you can either put your head back and hit the switch with your head, or what's really hard for you to see is this green band. We had a switch on the green band too. So she had the option to either use her hand or her head. And she switched back and forth within one session. Within 1 hour, she understood, oh, I can make this thing go with my head or my hand. It was amazing. And that's when I knew that this was something that I will love.
You think about that as a cognitive process, being able to decide, oh, I'm too tired to lift my head up to make this move, I'll use my hand. She had to think about that, make that decision, and get that motor program together in her mind to make her hand do that. So there's a lot involved there. The other thing that's important is that the very first time they put her in the car, it took her, almost 2 minutes?
2 minutes and 25 seconds.
To lift her head up and hit that switch. So a lot of times people will, the very first time we bring it in, they're like, it doesn't work. They don't get it. You have to give them time. You have to give your kids time to show you that they can do it. It may take you helping them at first. It may take just extra time for them to put that motor plan together, but don't give up. Okay. So if we have time, we will also, you guys can come up and look at the car. We can try some other kids in it. We're happy to do that. We love it. It's something that we do all the time. But I did want to talk about other supports, because not everybody can fit a car in their house or have access to a car. So this is a really cool way to support a child to move. If they can access the wheels, then they use it sort of as a little wheelchair at the floor level. Out in the hallway, I have where I just took a little scooter board and put some cushions on it, and I actually been able to use that, which is even easier than this with some kids. So don't be afraid to be creative. Try different ways just to get moving. This is a little bit of a more sophisticated way. This is the Firefly Scoot. It's called a mobility seat. It's a 3-in-1 or a 2-in-1. So this one actually, you can use an Allen key and take off parts of it so that a child could, if they weren't able to use their arms, they could use their feet to kind of scoot forward. And they can also be put on their stomach in this particular device. But these are kind of things, as parents, you want to kind of look around and research a little bit and have some ideas, so that when you do get connected, or if you're doing it on your own, you kind of have an idea of what's out there and what you could access. This is a Firefly Upsee. I like this for standing and moving around. There are a few other ones out there. I think there's some called Angel Wings, but it's just another way, and it takes the stress off of a parent's back, but gives a child a way to move and feel walking. This is just an example of a different kind of walker. This is called a pony walker. But there are tons of walking support devices out there. There are gait trainers. There are reverse walkers that come from behind. And I know Rob had some examples of different mobility supports out there. There are partial weight walkers. So there are some that actually take some weight off of the child. They don't have to fully support themselves on their legs so that they can more easily take a step and move forward. And there's also mobile standers. So a stander, the difference between a walker and a stander is obviously a stander is stable. You're just in the standing position. However, there are some called mobile where they're on wheels. So even though you're just in a standing position, you can move yourself forward with your arms. Okay. So I organized it kind of going through the stability and mobility and then object interaction. So once you become mobile and you're exploring your world, then you want to be able to interact with different objects. And so there's lots of ways to support kids to do that who have difficulty accessing objects. This is one of my favorite. A parent made this for a child who was not yet crawling. We had him in a mobility device, but he was trying to learn to crawl. And Dad said he gets really tired after he's been trying to move around, but he still wants to play and access things. So what Dad did was he went around the house and found all the things that this child liked to interact with or would see from crawling at that level and put it on a board so that when he was sort of taking a break and resting, he could still access those things, explore them, pick them up, move them around, and learn about them. Another way to do this for kids that have trouble with even sitting up, this little girl, she actually had spinal muscle atrophy, so positioning was really difficult, and she had trouble breathing. So we had to meet her medical needs first, but we still wanted her to be able to access and learn about toys. So what we did was we used a toy bar. And toy bars can also be used for kids that need more sensory input. They can be used to help stimulate vision. And I'm gonna let Nicole talk a little bit about vision with the toy bar, and then there's a video that will help with that. And also for expanding play. So in the beginning, you know, just like you see the baby bars, you're just touching, batting, but you can expand that for a child by putting objects together. So maybe the child is going to have a doll hanging and a spoon hanging, and they can feed the baby. So you can expand those things, or you can expand memory by moving things around.
Oh, the next one's the video. Okay. So this is Annabella, and she has what's called cortical visual impairment. Generally, what happens is, especially in the very beginning, you're only able to look at one, maybe two colors, and we have to figure out what color that is. And then what we have to do is really work on changing the environment that they are trying to play in. So this is an example of a toy bar. And as you can see, Annabella's color is red, shiny red. And notice that we put the science boards up because what happened was when she's sitting there, it was hard for her to play because she was also seeing what was in the background. So we put that up to block out what she was seeing. Oh.
All right, here come your toys. These are your toys. What a difference. Oh. You went for the beads, but you got the bell too, huh? Which one do you want? Which one do you want? You want the bell. You want the bell, huh? the first time I've seen her show interest in just the bell. Usually it's the beads or the pom-pom. Oh, excuse me. Not just 2 beads. Bless you. Checking in with Mama. Mommy. She's still there. You got more weight on your face now, huh? So then over time, what would be a fun activity is let's move the bell to see if she finds the bell. Oh. So let's put it in the middle, let's put it on her right side, and give her right arm sleeve. Well, never mind. Says, oh, I heard you talking about lefty. All right, I'll use righty now. Do you have the bell? Do you have that? Big girl. Big girl. Like she said, lift her out, maybe. Oh. Can you say hi? We're watching you play. I'm checking you out. Nice job using your hands, playing. I think I might have moved her back just a little bit.
Okay, so we'll pause it there. And what I forgot to set up for you was before we had that toy bar up, but we didn't put those boards down. So she wasn't really, she wasn't playing with her toy bar. So then if we blocked everything out with a white background, she was able to locate the toys and obviously play and look at the same time, which is very difficult for her. And I don't know if you saw or heard me say to her mother, so a way to expand on this is, okay, we found out that she loves the bell, which actually she usually loves the pom-pom. So that tells you, okay, she's looking at something new. So now let's also maximize on that and let's move it so that she's moving her hands and she's moving her eyes and trying to play with that in different positions also.
Also, the cognition part of that is I have to find the bell. It moved. I have to know that it's gone and I have to look for it. So you can see like all of these things, even though it seems so simple, oh yes, she's reaching out and batting at the bell, you really can look at all the aspects of it. And if you know what you're trying to learn and instill, then you can expand the play to support those skills.
Well, next we have sticky mitts. So these are literally what they sound like. They're mitts with some Velcro. And these are for children who have a really hard time grabbing an object, but you know that they want to play with it and they want to explore it and they want to bring it to their mouth. So what you do is you place Velcro on the mitts and on the object. And that way, if they can't yet get their hand around an object, they can still grab it, still look at it, explore it, taste it, put it in their mouth, whatever it is that they are trying to do with that toy. And you can talk about Vanderbilt.
Yeah. I'm not going to bother with this study unless you're very interested, but they have basically shown that if you give small infants a way to access those objects, then you'll find that they have what they call developmental cascades. So that helps them in expanding some of those other skills in the communication and the learning aspect. But I think the next slide, yeah. So what I've helped some parents do is you know, maybe a child is able to grasp for a little bit of time, but then they drop it out of their grasp, and in order for that child to have longer period of time with the object, you can use these sticky mitts. And I just take old mittens from wintertime and I pull out the middle so it's not too hot, and I sew some Velcro into them and put, you know, you put the soft side on the mitt and you put the rough side on the object, and you can use it in that way. So it's a simple thing to do. And then in thinking about kind of simple things and access to toys, I put this slide in because it's just an example of sometimes kids are getting reach and grasp, but they're having trouble sitting, or they can sit, but when they reach, they push the toy away. So simple things you can do is just sort of containing the toys. So we put this little guy in a laundry basket with his toys, and he was then able to keep them there and keep touching them. Even if they dropped out of his grasp, he could keep re-picking them up without them going away from him on the floor and then him just sitting there with no toys. This on the side with the ball, that's a therapist, and she's doing two things there. She's working on sitting and also providing, this is Shauna, this is Kelly's daughter. But Shauna apparently has a big need for spinning, rotation, to help for her sensory system. So they were using that to do some of the spinning, and then when you give a child the sensory input that they need, they're often able to then regulate enough to work on a harder skill like sitting. So she may start with some spinning and get ready and then work on some sitting. But you could also use a laundry basket to do that. There's no reason why you can't, you know, take the laundry basket, put a towel under it on a slippery floor, do some spinning, do some sitting. So just remember that some parents feel like I don't have a therapy ball, or I don't have that special disc, but you don't have to. You can use the things in your house to do the same kinds of things. Just another example, I just love this so much because what you see here is Mom knows what is motivating, what toys she likes, and she obviously is working on some sitting here, but she doesn't have anything special. She has the couch cushions. We're working on sitting. We're doing object interaction, and we're getting all of that social. So you're meeting a lot of those needs at the same time. So it's just an example to remember that, again, everything that you do in your normal life is therapy. It's learning. I put a lot of things about object interaction in here, so I wanted to just provide a lot of ideas. But this is one that Nicole and I use a lot because we constantly have hair ties with us. And if a child maybe is trying to hold their spoon or hold a rattle or whatever it is, and it's not, their grasp is not maintained, we can just take these rubber bands and give them some assistance with their grasp. And this is just another example of that. Another adaptation for kids that have more fine motor difficulties are called page fluffers. So it's just giving a little bit of a lever to the page so that the child can more easily access that on their own. Doesn't need your help every time they want to turn the page. And they're easy things to do. My son loves to help me with the hot glue gun and put the popsicle sticks on. Some other examples are contact cases. And then I've also used furniture stubs that you put under the bottom to slide. They're very thick, so you can just put them on each page and it fluffs them up. These are pegboards, kind of like the toy bar. It's just another way to access things. A lot of times kids that have difficulty stabilizing themselves and fine motor at the same time, we want to stabilize the object so that they can interact with it. So by putting it on that board, it's not going to move away from them. I love the little doll one. My son doesn't, because he wants them to all be cars. But but it's really cool here because you can feed the baby, brush the baby's hair, read a book to the baby. So you're really expanding play schemes that way. So getting beyond just the sensory motor exploration, now you're starting to talk about pretend play, and you're increasing that child's learning as you go. This is an example of a friend of mine who had difficulty. He could hold his bottle, but when we moved to a cup, he just couldn't get that grasp on it. So we took an O-ball and just cut out the top, put his sippy cup in it, and watch this. Oh, it's sideways. I'm sorry. I don't know why that happened.
What is it, just regular Kool-Aid?
Maybe this person is.
But there he goes. Let's see if that'll fix it.
Oh, that's restarting the timer.
Oh. I'm sorry about that. At my house, everything played perfectly. But you can still get the idea. Basically, now he's able to drink that on his own because he can maintain the grasp long enough for the cup and the weight of the cup. Okay, so I kind of jumped back and forth between stability and mobility, but then we'll go to standing. And I'm not sure, I have a lot of information about standing if you're interested in it. Basically, in pediatrics in general, there's not as much research as adults, but for standing in particular, most recently, what I've been reading, the recommendation is once a child gets to be between about 12 and 18 months old, usually I do try to get kids standing right around 12 months because that's when typically kids start to stand. And there's a lot of benefits to standing, physical benefits, physiological benefits, from bone mineral density to bowel and bladder function, circulatory function, but there's also psychological benefits to standing, the communication aspect, because you are in a different position when you're interacting with other people than when you're sitting or if you're down on the floor. And ability to participate in activities where people are upright. When you use the stander, you can do things like bring the child into the kitchen while you're cooking, have them, near the counter or the table, and they're smelling the things that you're cutting. Maybe they're playing with a toy while you're making dinner, or maybe they're playing with a spoon while you're making dinner, or maybe they're playing with water, but they're experiencing that from the standing position and being near you and seeing the things you're doing. So those are the kinds of things to think of. And then as far as therapeutic benefits of standing, the recommendations mostly for children have been for kids to stand from 30 to 90 minutes at a time, 5 times a week. So some kids, they get to stand at school, but some, maybe they only get to stand in their stander at school twice a week. So you have to think about, when are the other times I'm going to do this? And why would we only want them to stand at school? We want them to stand at home and anywhere else, just like every other kid. Okay. I'm going to pass this on. This comes from just early intervention research and generally what we've learned as far as how children learn best.
All right, children learn best through repeated interactions with the environment and within your typical daily routines. So what's important for your providers when they're coming into your house is to make sure that they are diving into your daily routines. That is really important because a lot of times they'll say, oh, well, what's the best time? And you'll say, oh, well, we're eating lunch at whatever, so come after. Have them come at lunchtime. This is when we're learning, and this is when we're experiencing objects in our world, because they have to be meaningful to the child. So that's why we want to jump into our daily routines. And they are supported by people for whom they have genuine connection with, which is you. Oh.
So I really love this too. Kelly gave this to me, and the reason is because as a therapist, what I see here is that Shauna is getting all of these experiences. She got all of these experiences as a growing little girl in everything that they were doing. She was getting that rotational input because mom sought it out, not only at home, not just when the therapist was there, but when they were in the community and normal activities that other kids were doing, so that Shauna participated along with them. It's really important. And, like I said before, you have great ideas. As parents, usually it's the parent says to me, I want to be able to do this, and then we figure out a way to do that. And that's kind of how that's how I kind of come at my job and meeting the needs of any child that I go and see. I think that's kind of it. We kind of left a lot of open to see because we weren't sure what kind of questions you guys might have. So, but I think one other just really important part is a lot of people, when they think of early intervention, again, there's those two ways, the professionals and the routines. You really want to merge those as much as you can, because a therapist coming, even once a week, say they came once a week for 30 minutes or an hour, that's only one practice opportunity. So really, you're going to learn by doing it every day. And who's going to support the every day? That's family and caregivers. That's you guys. So if you have any questions, we're happy to do that. We can also talk to you about the cars or any of the materials that are out in the hallway. Thanks for your time.
I have a live mic. Does anyone have any questions?
So how do you go about getting one of those little pushy button things, or like if we have a physical therapist at home, like what would be something I would recommend? Because I think that would be super beneficial for Auburn to have at school or for other kids.
Okay, sure. So that's a great question. You're asking about the switch with the cars. So one thing you could do is first I would just go look up some information about it. Just Google, Go Baby Go is one way to start. But then bring it up with your therapist, and you can say, we were at a conference, she had an opportunity to drive it, she understood it right away, she was accessing the switch and driving, so I really feel like this could support her. Ask your therapist, do you know anything about it? And then sort of, some therapists know a lot, some don't really, and so if you bring that information to them, they should be able to explore it with you. And then it just depends as far as accessing. Some early intervention programs or school programs have loaners that you could borrow to try. Some will help you buy them through your insurance. Sometimes the system will buy one. It just kind of depends on how it works. Does that answer your question?
And they can be used with a variety of toys, and there are ways to modify toys, especially if they're battery operated, with what's called a battery interrupter. So there's a variety of ways to use those switches, not just with the cars. And Enabling Devices is a good company to look up to look at the switches. Enabling Devices, or AbleNet and AbleNet. You're welcome. Any other questions?
Anyone else? Any other questions?
Battery interrupter.
Okay. You're close enough. You didn't need to.
Yeah, so what happens with the battery interrupter is if you have a toy that, unfortunately, you have to have a toy that has a simple off and on switch. Otherwise, it won't work. Okay, so I've certainly purchased some like toys, like a disco ball, for example, from like Five Below, that has a simple off-on switch. Then you take the battery interrupter, you purchase it for the size of the battery. If it's a AAA, buy the AA, and you can cut it with your scissors to make it fit into the slot with the battery. But there are YouTube videos on how to do this. So you can just put in YouTube battery interrupter. And figure out how to do that. And then the other end plugs into the switch, and then you turn it on. When you turn the toy on, it shouldn't turn on until you hit the button, until you hit the switch.